Hello, I'm Jordan. I'm going to make a brief tag video today. The other day, Noah over at Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse made a video. I don't think he explicitly called it a tag, but he left it open to becoming a tag, and I think it's a wonderful idea. The idea is simply to name 5 books that you consider perfect. And first of all, I will second Noah's claim, which will probably turn out to be kind of a controversial claim as this tag goes around, that what we're talking about here is subjective. There is no such thing as an objectively perfect book, in my opinion. But I do have things that I consider perfect in books, and one of them is something that Noah himself said, which is that perfect books tend to be short, I think. There's something very satisfying about just a concise, direct novel. And then I would also say that perfect books tend to not be experimental or innovative. I don't have anything against experimental fiction. I just think that by its nature, innovation is not concerned with perfection. It's just trying to kind of stir the pot. And I do think that perfect books have a certain level of respect for convention. And then I would also say that Harold Bloom has a quote regarding great poetry where he says it has a quality of inevitability, where each word and detail feels like it absolutely has to be exactly where it is. And if you can get beyond the insufferable pretension of that, I think that there's something to that. And I do think that all 5 of my selections here have that quality, at least for me. So first of all, I'm going to go with Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which is not only perfect, but perhaps my favorite novel. I just think that the atmosphere and the characters in this book have just such an emotional purity in a way that's not at all realistic, but that feels very true, if that makes sense. And I also just think that the narrative structure of this book is perfect, in the sense that these are larger than life, passionate, vicious characters, but you're experiencing them second or third hand. And then there's that wonderful final paragraph where it just kind of pops the balloon and brings everything that came before back down to earth, literally. It's just a perfect novel, in my opinion. Next, I'm going to go with The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I don't own a physical copy of it, unfortunately, but this is a collection of his short stories. And with Hawthorne in general, but House of the Seven Gables in particular, I think the perfection largely comes from the language. It's just so, the prose is just so delicate and carefully done and just mesmerizing, just beautiful. And there's also a wonderful simplicity to the story. It's just about a very old New England house and the woman who lives there, and kind of what happens when certain people come into her life. Just the simplicity of the story is almost like a fairy tale or a fable or a ghost story. And what he's able to do with that very, very simple premise is just wonderful. So yeah, that's another instance of perfection being kind of simple. The next I'm going to go with Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I would say that everything I've read from Virginia Woolf would certainly qualify as perfect, but if I had to choose a favorite, I think it would be this. This book, more than anything else I've ever read, just captures what it feels like to be alive and to live a life, and in just such a fluid, gorgeous way. And I feel like it unifies not only the various characters in this book, but it unifies the experience of living in a way that feels almost religious to me. It's got that level of power. This is a book that makes me very happy, and not in a superficial or any kind of surface sense. In a deep, fundamental way, this book kind of lifts my spirits. And it's Virginia Woolf, so it's also just perfectly written, I think. So that's going to be my choice for that. And then I will also say We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is another example of a very, very simple story. It's simply about 2 sisters and their uncle who are the sole survivors of a mysterious incident that resulted in the deaths of the rest of their family, and kind of their relationships with each other and with the community that they live in. And it's just so expertly done. The characters are absolutely fascinating. The narrator, it's narrated by the youngest sister, and she is a deeply fascinating and engaging and unreliable narrator. And yeah, it's just an example of, I think, perfect kind of craftsmanship. It's not trying to do anything profound per se, but there's a wonderful willingness to be ambiguous in this book, which I just think leaves it open to so much interpretation. It's a book I've only read once, but something I definitely want to return to often, I think. And then finally, I'm going to go with a book that is not short at all, Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. Now, I am not generally a huge fan of Pynchon. I think largely he can be a little self-impressed and pretentious, and maybe I'm a prude or maybe I'm just too dumb, but I feel like I very rarely get the sense that the vast amounts of pornography that he insists on putting in his books is at all necessary. And I also feel like that his books tend to not have very much emotional appeal. But none of that is true for this book. This is a bottomless book. There's just so much being said here about history and memory and fantasy. And it's also a surprisingly moving book, I think. It turns into something very whimsical and sad, while also being just tremendously fun and playful throughout. It's just it's a masterpiece, I think. So yeah, Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. I've probably reread this book more than anything else I've ever read. I think I've read it 4 times, which is quite a bit for me. So yeah, that is the 5 perfect books tag. I'm going to tag a couple people. First of all, I'm going to tag Knitting Books, etc. And then I'm going to tag Tom at Tom LA Books. And I think we can probably all guess what at least one of his selections is going to be. But anyways, thanks for watching. Have a good day.